How are you?
Good, good. So in today's session, we're joined with Nyaya, which is an initiative that is committed to providing simple, actionable, and reliable information to day-to-day legal problems. And the issue that we would be talking about today is disseminating tenancy laws. And this is because basically tensions have started to build between landlords and their tenants on the pretext of the pandemic. And most students, for instance, in university, have had to sort of leave their belongings to return home. Um, and this has caused a lot of anxiety and uncertainty within students. So as a result of this, many student unions and bodies asked whether they could postpone their rent payment. And the government, the Delhi government, also said that migrant workers and students will be able to postpone their payment, and no landlord will be able to force them to pay rent. However, they were invariably at the mercy of the landlord because this a notice was retracted by the government, if I'm right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, so this has sort of led to a lot of harassment by landlords, including threats, for instance. And a recent example is that of a student called Sachin from Delhi's St. Stephen's College. And he'd already paid sort of half of his month's rent in April, but he was being forced to pay the rent for the successive months, although he would not be staying there. And
Okay.
because of the pandemic, most students and most people have like lack a fixed income, right? So even their parents, for instance, do not have a fixed income during this time. So it's sort of playing on their vulnerabilities as well. So, and then the landlords invariably threaten them to sort of their stuff to be thrown away. And some students like left their belongings totally. Even I, when I left, I sort of had to leave so many things and just like rush back home. So
Oh
it's
my.
not really our fault. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, and also despite the fact that we're 18 and above, the landlords sort of are forcing us to having to talk to our parents and involving our parents into the whole situation, which is kind of frustrating as well. So, the topic and the discussion topic today is what is the sort of legal recourse for these students and what rights do we actually confer, you know? Yeah.
So first of all, thank you for having us here. And I actually want to start off by saying that not just for students, I mean, yes, students have been in a very vulnerable position ever since this pandemic started. Tenancy laws in India are actually not that great when it comes to protecting the rights of tenants.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you want this specific questions that like if you have, I can go about it, or I can just like give you a brief overview of a few things that you need to keep in mind to ensure that you don't get bullied. So just so I mean, if I before we like move on, like start with your questions, there's two things I
Sure.
want to highlight. Is that like throughout the conversation I'll be coming back to this. So two key points. First one being that you when you're when you're a person renting in India, you have two kinds of rent agreements that actually exist. One is a rent agreement, your lease deed, and some cities have this practice of getting into a live-in license agreement, which is a different kind of an agreement, like a house, like a housing rent agreement, but it does not come under the renting laws of the country. So the leave and license agreement is actually basically just giving you a license to um, use the particular property that the landlord is like the person is renting out to you, and you don't have the same rights as a tenant would under your rent control acts of the state.
Sure.
Now, so this is the first thing to remember, that like there is a distinction, that there is one thing called as a lease deed or a rent agreement, and the second thing and a second agreement called the leave-in license agreement. And the second thing, the second point that I want to highlight is that your rent agreement is your contract, right? So basically, whatever rights and obligations that you have are almost the same as the landlords. Like, because in a contract, you are two parties and both parties are on an equal footing. So you need to
Yeah.
understand that because of this contractual relationship, your landlord is not doing any favors on you.
Yeah.
You have as much as rights and duties under a contract as your landlord does. So please do not feel like, you know, you are like, your landlord can get away with bullying you into a lot of things. So yeah, if
Yeah.
you have any specific questions, I can like answer them and then get back to these points as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so as you said that they're sort of both are in equal positions of
Mm-hmm.
power, but then the sort of question that always like rises up is when can the landlord evict a tenant, and in what scenarios and in what situations can they do
So if you
so?
have a rent agreement, or
Yeah.
be even a leave-in license agreement, there will be a clause called as the notice period clause in your agreement.
Okay.
So if you actually go through it, generally, like in standard form of contracts, that you'll see that these um, notice period, this notice period is generally for a 1 month, that either the landlord or you have to give if you want to get out of the contract
Yeah.
of the rent agreement. So, and under, if you have a rent agreement, if you have a lease deal, under rental laws of the state, either say Delhi Rent Control Act or Maharashtra Rent Control Act, there are certain reasons given under which a landlord can ask you to leave. So those reasons are basically if you've not paid rent for more than 2 months, then if you've illegally sublet the house to someone without informing the landlord,
Mm.
then if you use the house for any other purpose apart from the residential purpose that was the house that was led to you, then if you've not been living in the house for 6 months, if say you the house needs to go through some like repairs and reconstruction or something, or in case the house is unsafe for human habitation. So basically, if there are any of these reasons, the landlord can give you he has to give you, like, you know, fair amount of notice to vacate the property, and he cannot
Yeah.
just up and ask you to leave. Like, it has to be one of these reasons if you have a lease deed. And if you have a leave-in license, it's generally like either of the parties asking, either the tenant or the landlord asking you to leave. But an important thing to know is that this notice period has to be followed if you are being evicted. He can't just
Yeah.
up and kick you out.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. My next question is that if, for instance, tenants are being harassed and if they choose to lodge a complaint against the landlord, does
Mhm.
that automatically suggest that they will be evicted? Or what's the recourse for that?
As I said, like, you know,
Yeah,
if you are being harassed or whatever the case is, he can't just up and kick you out. He has to
yeah,
follow the notice period clause. If not, he is violating the contract, and you can actually proceed legally against him for getting damages. Like, you will have to approach a lawyer at this point if you want to proceed for violating of contract. But again, like, he is legally bound to the contract as much as you are, so he can't just like up and kick you out.
yeah,
If you filed a complaint against him for harassment, you go ahead and you can talk to the police. The police may they try to intervene and make sure that the landlord does not like bully you or harass you any further. But even then, like, even if he wants to kick you out, then he will still have to give you that notice period. It may be
yeah,
1 month or 2 months, as your contract specifies.
sure. So, for instance, if my lease is expired during the lockdown period,
Mm-hmm.
do I still have to vacate the house right away and pay the increased rent which I would have paid due to the renewal of the lease?
So the first point to note is that, and for the first part of your question, for leaving the house after your lease is up, it's something that you have to negotiate with the landlord, because the law does not
Okay.
actually cover such a situation. And this lockdown is also like a once in a lifetime thing that no one actually saw coming. So there were no legal protections in place to actually ensure that
Yeah.
people are like the tenants are actually like safeguarded at this point. So the best you can do is negotiate with your landlord to continue on with your current arrangement. And for the second part of your question, no, you are under no legal obligation to pay excess rent, because for that excess rent to apply, as most cities do, like in Bangalore, there is this thing that after the first lease period is elapsed, the new agreement would be for 5% for 5% higher rent. Delhi has
Okay.
10%, Bombay has 10%. So, but that's the thing. Your contract says that the next contract is going to be for 10% and above, right? So this is something,
Yeah.
again, you have to negotiate with your landlord, that since there is no contract actually being signed between us,
Yeah.
and since you are stuck where you are, I am stuck where I am, let's
Yeah.
make the best of the situation and I will give you the continued rent. It's all
Yeah.
about how you negotiate. This brings me
Negotiate.
back to
Yeah.
my first point. You really need to understand that the landlord's not doing any favors on you. You are as much as a party to the contract as the landlord is, and
Yeah.
which is why you have the same amount of demanding power as the landlord has in terms of like increasing your rent. So it's all about negotiating. Once you
Yeah.
understand that you have equal rights in a contract, you automatically are in a much more empowered position to ask for your rights or ask for a better treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if negotiations have sort of taken place and the landlord refused to renew the lease and is still asking for the renewed lease amount as rent during the lockdown, are they allowed to do that legally?
So, for students specifically, it's a very tricky situation because immediately after the lockdown was imposed back in March, on 29th March, MHA came out with a notification saying that you couldn't ask rent from students and migrant
Yeah.
workers or workers in general. But again, as you had pointed out, that it was actually revoked like much later, and people have been using the excuse that there's no lockdown anymore in most cases. Again, it's a legally unprecedented situation.
Yeah.
It's all on how best you negotiate with your landlord. I know most of these answers that would questions that you'd be asking might have the answer in the negative, but that's the best possible way to realize is that the best possible solution to get out of this is to know that you have as much negotiating power as the landlord does, because ultimately, even if he evicts you, he's not going to get another tenant, right? You
Yeah.
are like you have equal negotiating powers as the landlord in this case, so it's best to be as insistent as possible in the
Right.
just like as polite as possible, because at the end of the day, it's like
Yeah.
you need to make sure everything is running smoothly and you have a house to live in.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Well, so if we negotiate and if we're like, can I pay half the rent? Is that also just based off of negotiation? Like there's no way that like it like all of it is just based off of your negotiation with the landlord. But what if they're sort of not conciliatory with you? How would that go about? Because like, can I pay half rent or will I have to pay the whole rent?
So there is no legal or statutory backing that says that only or you can only pay half rent or you're like exempted from paying rent. You would have to pay rent because, as I said, it's a contract, and you agreed, like when you signed the contract, you agreed to pay from month to month, like a certain amount of money. And if you are not able to, if your landlord is not able to, he cannot immediately evict you, right? Like you
Yeah,
have, as I said earlier, you have
the notice.
he's either going to give you a notice to either vacate the house, which may be
Yeah.
1 month as it is in most cases, or again, as I said, he's going to try to negotiate with you to give as much rent as possible, because it's a loss for him also if you leave. He's
Yeah.
not going to find another tenant behind you like
Yeah.
after you leave. So it's best to like everything relies on your negotiating part and
Okay.
asserting your rights. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so as you said that there has to be a notice provided, so this is
Yes.
probably not legal because the question is that the landlord has entered the house in spite of me paying half the rent during lockdown. Is that legal? It's not because, as you said, there has to be an advance
It's
notice,
Yes, see,
right?
there has to be an advance notice to ask you to leave, to vacate. There also has to be a separate notice if the landlord is coming to the property. He has to give you advance notice before entering. Like either he has to call you or he has to let you know in somehow in advance that he's coming to the property to visit for this reasons. He cannot just show up at your doorstep, because a lot of
Yeah,
people also I'm like talking from personal experience here, where it's just the landlord shows up at your door and he's like, okay, we need to discuss this about whatever the house and stuff, and
yeah,
I was in the middle of a meeting or I was indecent. It's just it's not right, right? I mean, it's not just about whether you have a rent agreement or a leave-in license. Under both circumstances, you will find in the contract itself also that if the landlord wants to come to your house, he has to give you advance notice.
yeah, sure.
So that advance notice has to be separate, and if he's vacating you, of course, there has to be a different notice as well.
Yeah. Well, so if the landlord says that they do have another tenant to start a new lease within the lockdown month, say from like June, and asks you to vacate, does
Mm-hmm.
that not leave all students in a very vulnerable position?
It does. So the best you can do here is I mean, it's practically impossible for you to leave as well, right? Because you're not going to get
Yeah,
like transportation stuff to get your stuff out. You're not going to be able to get all your own like personal things out, or you're not able to get transportation for yourself because it's a
yeah,
lockdown period, or like certain areas are under like they've been sealed by most municipalities. You don't know what to do. In those cases, if he says that there is someone coming to like move in, like personally, I would think it's a bluff because if you can't vacate, if you physically can't leave, how can you expect someone to like move in, right? So again,
right,
at that point, it all boils down to how you negotiate with your landlord. And if he is being like, if you feel that the harassment has reached such a level where like the person is literally physically just like standing at your door and asking you to leave, please approach the police because it is harassment at the end of the day. Like you're trying your level best, you're doing everything in your power. If something's not
right,
happening, it's out of your hands. And if you feel that
right,
the person is bullying you or harassing you, file a complaint against such a person.
right. But then, like, technically, although there is an equal relationship between a landlord and a tenant, but the
Yeah.
fact that the landlord has the power to evict a tenant, it sort of is more theoretical than like its practical implications are quite limited, right? Because a tenant can still sort of force, not force, even not coerce, but just ask like the tenant to leave. The landlord can ask a tenant to leave. In that case, during the
See,
pandemic, yeah.
in that case, if your landlord has not given you notice and he's immediately just standing at your doorstep and asking you to leave, like he's not followed the notice period clause, call the police. Because this does amount to harassment, this does amount to him violating the contract, your rental agreement, be it leaving
Yeah,
license or your uh, lease deed. It
yeah,
is like basically him creating undue pressure on you. It does not come under the rental laws specifically because again like rental laws don't account for most of these situations. This would fall under harassment and you can personally proceed against the landlord for harassing you, like that would be a complaint of harassment with the police, not for
right,
violating your contract.
right.
Yeah,
Well, so as you said, we could approach the police, and that can also be quite a daunting thing.
it
But
is. Yeah.
what would you say? How do you say we can go about it in a better manner? Like, because you can't physically go to file a complaint
So
either.
what you can do is that download this app on your smartphone called Indian Police at Your Call. Yeah, it's at your call. So it has the information of the nearest police station on in the app. You just have to enter the area in, and they'll give you the number and address of the person. You can either dial 100 and have the police come over, which they most in most cases they do. They're very quick in responding to complaints on the police control room helpline. That's 100. Or you can download this app and call like directly call the nearest police station. Like
Sure.
it'll like basically you just have to enter in your location and it shows you the police stations in your area. And
Right.
like in my experience, not just as a lawyer, and I know like and most of the times like there is a level of harassment that people face, like especially young people face at the hands of police as well, knowing that you are too
Yeah.
inexperienced or too young or you're not mature enough. Police is like like if you present
Yeah.
yourself like in a better manner, as in you present yourself as a right bearer who has equal rights and duties under a contract as your landlord does. If you present yourself strong, you
Yeah.
definitely are going to get like you have a better chance of getting help from the police than like just
Right.
frantically.
Yeah. Yeah. But sort of in most cases, it's also how like the landlord can try to pay off the police and like bribery, etc. So how do you like go about it if that's the case?
That's actually a very like tricky situation because I
Yeah.
personally have like been trying to figure out how to get out of this because legally
Yeah.
speaking, I do get away with a lot of things because I can easily say that I'm a lawyer, you have to listen to me. Or, my friends say that, like, they call up and they said, listen, my friend's a lawyer, I know what you're doing is wrong. But
Yeah.
you shouldn't have to fall under such situations where you have to threaten people. But just if you are articulate and if you are like strong armed in stating your case to to the police officer who comes and says that no, this is wrong, I know this is
Mm.
wrong, what is happening here is that I am being bullied. So if you don't file a complaint, I will go to another police station. Because another important thing to remember is that most people often like think that if the nearest police station is the nearest police station is the one that you have to go to, but that's not the
Yeah.
case. There's something there's a concept called zero FIR, which basically says that you can file a police complaint or an FIR at any police station in the country. So if one
Mm.
person has been bribed by someone, say the landlord goes ahead and bribes this cop, you go to another police station, you file a complaint there. How many people is he
Yeah.
like? If they refuse, go to another police station, because they can't deny you to file. Like they can't deny filing a complaint just because you are not living in the area. It's their responsibility to take on the complaint and transfer it to the right police station to go ahead and carry out the investigation. So if one
Yeah.
police officer is not listening to you, just go to another one.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And what would your sort of tips be for negotiating with the landlord? Because that seems to be the best recourse.
So again, like the first and the only like key takeaway from this, I believe, is for you to state that you are not at the mercy of the landlord. It might seem like it right now, like it might be a very
Yeah.
daunting situation where you are feeling like you're going to be kicked out of the house, and you're not like you might feel like you're at the mercy of the landlord, but you're not. You have a contract with this person. This person has
Yeah.
like if the person is letting you their house, you have also paid all the money till date, right? You've not defaulted. You both
Yeah.
have been honoring the terms of your agreements. If something like COVID or lockdown has happened, you have to state your case saying, well, listen, this is unprecedented. It's not my fault. It's not like in my hands, literally. And
Yeah.
state, like, basically just point out that you are a right bearer too, as much as the landlord is. And if you remember that, you will be in a better position to argue for yourself.
Yeah. That makes sense. Um, but so for instance, after the lockdown ends and I still can't go and vacate the place physically and cannot pay the full rent. Are
Mm-hmm.
there any considerations for us in that scenario?
Unfortunately, no, because the one notification that was there for students was also been revoked since. It was only for that limited period
Mm.
of the strict lockdown that was imposed back in March. Again, like even in say your rent control laws or your leave-in license under Indian Easement Act, like nothing records such an event. Like it's, as I said, it's legally unprecedented
Yeah.
for an entire country to go under lockdown. So no policymaker would have also thought that a situation like this could ever arise. So you don't.
Yeah.
So legally, there is no recourse available. It's all on how you negotiate, and the best you can negotiate. You can only best negotiate after you understand that you're an equal right bearer in this scenario.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So in cases of like mental harassment or maybe sexual harassment by the landlords, what sort of evidence is required to build a case for the same?
So, if like specifically if women are being sexually harassed in like by your landlord, it would like it does not, again, as I said, like our tenancy laws are not very great. It does not cover these situations of harassment at the hands of landlords, but you can definitely proceed against IPC sections. You can proceed, like you can file a complaint for harassment under 354, section 354 of IPC that covers sexual harassment, and file a complaint with the police. One police is not listening to you, as I said, go to another police station. Like it's zero FIR.
Mm-hmm.
You can literally file an FIR at any police station and
Yeah.
proceed against this landlord in this manner. And if
Yeah.
this person, after you filed a complaint, is threatening to evict you, you tell the police this also. Like because the police will take care of it. Ideally, like I mean, it's their job to investigate and like build a case. But in these cases, they do help you out as well. Like if
Yeah.
you insist, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so do you think there's a sort of change required in the regulatory framework regarding tenant laws to sort of include these things such as harassment, which is a big issue now, you know.
So I really honestly I do think yes there is a change required, and a lot of states have been trying also, because there was this model tenancy law that had come in between that covered a lot of issues, but again, as it was just a suggestive measure, no state actually implemented it. Now there is definitely a need to figure out, I mean, not just in terms of to cover specific situations like this in terms of harassment, or but also in determining what the rights and duties of tenants and landlords are, because the
Yeah,
rent control laws that we have right now are pretty old, and they all talk about situations and leases that don't like scenarios that don't necessarily exist right now. Now if you would have seen, most contracts that are made for 11 months, right? And that's because registration act has this exemption that says that contracts under a year need not be registered, and they can go ahead and like either get it notarized or franked from the bank, or just like a stamp paper agreement. But
yeah,
the thing is it does not cover, so and because of this exemption, a lot of these agreements are uh, made for 11 months, and a lot of these rights and get diluted when you're
yeah.
when you're for an 11-month contract. So
Hmm.
definitely yes, there is a need for an amendment in this area, not just to cover like specific scenario what we went through in the last 6 months, but also generally to protect the rights of tenants.
Yeah. Okay. And someone asks whether there is an online way to file a complaint or an issue, as you
In
said.
fact, there is, yes. So most states
Yeah,
have. So if you're stuck in your house during a lockdown and you can't leave, as I said, the first thing you can do, as I said before, download the app, Indian Police on Call. It'll give you the details of the police stations nearby. You can call. You can directly phone them and tell them about, like, file a complaint with them. They can come, and once you
yeah,
call, they'll come to your place of residence and note down the complaint for you. Second thing you can do is that a lot, not all, but a lot of states have a way to file an FIR online. Like Delhi Police has
yeah,
an online portal to file complaints, like file FIRs online. But again, this is only for limited cases. Like serious cases cannot be reported online. You have to actually have the police.
hmm.
You have to either go to the police station or call up the station and register your complaint. But there are like certain
Sure.
states you can look up. You can look up, like if you're in Bombay, you can just check up Bombay Police's website, and there'll be an option there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And also, it seems as though the government has sort of forgotten about the students in this scenario, because this is quite, have seemed to be the most vulnerable out of all, right? And there's not much awareness or talk about this. So what are your sort of opinions on the same? Do you think it's true?
I do think that students have been affected in a very unique way, not just in terms of, like, of course, in terms of renting, yes, because so many were displaced, like, you were left at the mercy of people around them, because they got cut off from resources, they got cut off from their families. So when basically the framework was being built, for the protocols were being laid down for how the lockdown should have like what protocols should have been followed during the lockdown, students should have also been
Yeah,
accounted. They made an effort by putting in the notification, the 29th March notification, by trying to uh, may, like, exempt them from paying rent. But again, like, I think they should have done a little more than just putting the notification out there for the sake of, like, putting it out there, and actually gone ahead and have more detailed provisions for students and young people. Also, because it's just like,
sure.
because effects of that lockdown, even though the lockdown has been lifted nationwide, we're still
Yeah,
seeing, like, a lot of students being affected by either, be it rent control laws, or be it, like, educational institutions, like registrations and stuff. Just overall, yes, I do believe that,
sure,
there should have been more focus here, and not like avoided an entire uh, group
sure,
of, like, the population just completely.
sure. Well, this definitely also throws some light on how there is a need for youth representation to address like student issues. And that's why like YIF is working on its boot camp. So what do you sort of think could be other ways of increasing student awareness and student and youth representation, even within like the judicial framework, for instance, you know?
So as I like started off by saying that as one of the reasons why I pointed out that your rent agreement is a contract and that you're a right bearer is because at Nyaya we believe that if you like understand your rights, if you have access to your, if you understand the laws, you are automatically in a much more empowered position to demand for better things, right? Like that is
Yeah.
the main goal here. So what I mean, what my view in this point is that yes, there is a need for a like as YIF is like working, yes, there is like need for youth, more youth representation. There is also a need for simplifying and making sure that the law is reaches the people who it is meant for. If they
Yeah,
understand it, if they have access to it, they automatically know how to ask for better treatment. So
right,
that's the key point here. Yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I think the key takeaway from this, thank you so much for your talk. I think the key takeaway from this would just also be to empower youth into politics and just shed some light on how important it is to be involved. And being apolitical shouldn't really be a
Mm-hmm.
choice. It should be something that they voluntarily sort of participate in because it affects all of us at the end of the day.
True.
Well, this has sort of showed us that there is more need for youth and their contribution in politics.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.